If I can find the screen, there's the screen, there's the stuff. Make sure I've refreshed the page. Okay. So something you may have noticed, Sam, me and Jan, we went through all of the designs because obviously we'd been designing the proof of concept, more or less, what was already in the proof of concept and what we'd discussed, what had been figured out from that in the flowchart, pretty much converting this into screens, into different views. But all of that doesn't go into the initial sort of MVP or MVC, whatever we call it. I can't remember the acronym we use. So we've broken
MVC.
down MVC?
Minimally viable change.
Okay.
MVP is what everyone else in the world uses.
Right, okay. I'm going to correct that in here to MVC, and then I'll update Figma later. We've split the Figma file. I figured out once I got full access, I figured out how to actually make it look like everyone else's. So we split the file into the main sort of design, the actual file itself, then MVC designs, and then near future. So we've moved all the designs we had into something future, into the next step sort of area. Something that me and Jan can always continue to iterate on and work towards as and start slotting into future milestones based upon the map that we're going to discuss in a little bit, or the roadmap we're going to discuss. So this is very much just the minimum the minimum we're going to do for the first step of internal preview and just showing the whole flow from end to end in the UI. So obviously starting off, and if anyone has any questions or would like to point out any issues or anything they'd like to say, feel free to jump in and cut me off. Start off with an empty page. When someone visits the analytics, we don't know where the menu is yet, do we?
No. So there's a couple thoughts, and where I think we're probably going to land is making a standalone left sidebar entry. And the thing that we hadn't discussed and what I was getting stuck on originally is we're probably going to rename the existing analytics tab to internal analytics or GitLab, basically to differentiate these are your product versus this is how you're using GitLab sort of analytics. But we haven't made a final decision on that yet.
Do we need to have that final decision for the internal preview?
In my mind, no, because our rollout plan, we should scope it just to the internal handbook repository. So if people hate it, it's only in that one repo and we iterate on it from there. We will need to make that final decision and align everyone before we do our GA release, but not for the preview.
So having someone having to like click a URL rather than a button or share a URL is absolutely fine, because we're really the only people that are going to be using this UI.
Yeah, that'd be fine. With all of this, we just have to remember to be as iterative as possible, even if some of our iterations might feel a bit embarrassing with how they look, but that's actually a good sign that we're cutting deep enough into the scope that we're actually iterating effectively.
Yeah, okay. So in that case, then ignoring the left-hand sidebar stuff and the breadcrumbs more or less for now, we can add those in later based upon when we get a menu structure. Empty screen sets up, gives a brief description of product analytics with a learn more link, which should link to the documentation that Max is working on at the minute, which is also going to have admin settings details, which I think Axel is going to add to the admin area as well. So breakdown of what it is and how to set it up if they want to.
And just to note, sorry to interrupt, that this whole section won't even be available unless the admin settings has already been configured. The same for the menu item. The menu item won't show up unless product analytics is enabled and configured on an instance.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, that is actually a valid point, which then raises something that we will want to look at in later on, is how to surface product analytics before that to the user.
What do you mean? Before we do the flag to everyone?
I mean, so as Jan points out, this page until the admin settings have been enabled and like all the login credentials and stuff have been filled in for Jitsu and Cube and etc. And ClickHouse connection string and stuff. Until then, this screen won't show up. But how do we raise to the user that this exists in the product without the menu item existing yet? So we might want to look at having a banner or something in future. It's not a now problem. It's not an MVC problem. Yeah. It's a future us problem, but something we might want to look at is surfacing. How do we surface it and let them know that it exists?
We can always have this page without the setup button and just have learn more, which says that, hey, you first need to have this on an instance available or available on the instance. But yeah, it is a like next iteration.
Well, so in my mind, the way that we're going to roll this out is for the very, very first releases, we're going to be very careful with who we talk to and show about this. This will be, we have a sync conversation to introduce it. It has lots of weird edge cases. Here's how you do it. So how do we introduce it to the customers? We talk to them directly. Once we get to the point of having that left sidebar discussion and making a decision there, then it's going to be part of the product menu structure. They can find it organically at that point. So that's how I'm looking at it right now.
Okay, that makes things easier. And also adding to the menu is simpler when you're not having to hide it from the majority of people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. Once they're into that stage, once this loads, no. The next stage is it'll call our backend worker that Max has worked on. I've helped him with his, and at least initially, this will be super quick, really quick. It's because all we wait for is for the Jitsu front end JavaScript key to be returned to us. We don't wait to see if ClickHouse is initiated or anything like that because we don't need to. So once we've got that key, this screen moves on. This might be slower in future once people start creating their own infrastructures, stacks, their stacks. But for now, while we've got control of the stack, it is very quick. So this can almost be, a second, maybe 2 seconds, and then it's gone.
Yeah, I want to say, depending on how quick it is, we may end up just not showing much because if it's so fast, it's going to be detrimental to show a large page flashing for the loading time. But we'll see once we actually have something up and running for this.
Yeah, well, I'd want to see the data, not just on fast internet connections and everyone else, but slow as well. What that looks like.
On that previous page, I remember we used to, on the more fully fleshed out setup page, we had an area about, choose your data location. In this case, we won't have that as a choice for the user, correct? Because it's all going to go to the same place.
Yeah, this is literally the only option right now is what's set in admin settings. So
in that case, what we definitely need to make sure we do is talk about that in the documentation in text format, just because I know one of the first questions we will get is where is my data and where is it going? So we should make sure the documentation covers that so people can self-service that answer.
That's a very good point. Is someone writing that down, just out of curiosity?
I'm going to write that down. Or Jan, do you want to scribe it? Okay, thanks.
Because otherwise I will forget. And it's a very good point. Okay, onto the next screen. Right now we only have 3, as we've discussed. It's and they're all JavaScript related. They'll just expand and collapse to show the different options. The actual key that we've been given by the stack creation process will appear here, along with their domain that they've given in the admin settings for Jitsu. So that should literally in each one be a copy and paste. I know the next big one will be Ruby. So we can, in that case, we'll either just tack on a new collapse section. Well, we will do, but we might need to split up the page or change the heading slightly to make it clear that these existing options are all sort of front end JavaScript related, if that makes sense.
Right.
But that's a UX question. Then I don't foresee it changing dramatically. It's just we might need to highlight a bit clearer. which you don't have to. So right now.
So for this page, the really minimal information a customer would need is this API token as well as that destination. What would you think about putting those two pieces of information somewhere at the top of the page, at the bottom of the page, I don't care, but putting them standalone and making them more prominent. So that way, if someone says, hey, I want to use curl to do all my browsing, okay, knock yourself out. That way they don't have to look through example snippets here.
Yeah,
minor thought.
I think it's a good idea.
I agree. I will add something in as a reminder for myself.
I'm also documenting in the doc. I can post this to the designs later.
Oh, okay.
And that doesn't have to be part of the MVC, because I know that's going to be extra work. So if it's big, don't worry about that. That's a minor.
It's going to be like a 0.1 weight.
Yeah.
So we can do it.
Okay.
We've got the code, like all the values already.
I assumed, but I didn't want wanted to make sure it was clear, just not assume.
I really like the idea of making it clearer. And at some point we are going to need a way of surfacing, I guess, these details to the user after this stage as well. Because once after this point, unless you go to the code that you've created, you don't know the key. You're not told the key.
Oh, okay. So this is the only place to find that information, and this isn't shown after the dashboards are made.
Exactly. We don't have a natural. We don't have a natural location, as it were, to find that information yet at the minute.
So that part we do need in the MVC. So we need some way for them to get back to this once they forget what these values are.
Yeah. Or we need somewhere surfacing those values at the very, and then yeah. Okay.
Good feedback. We can it could always be a tab or a page. We'll figure something out.
Yeah, okay. It wasn't on the flow chart, but then again, I wrote that flow chart, so that would be why it's not on there. But it does make absolute sense and something that we should look into. Oh, hello, dog. He's been underneath the covers on the bed for about the last 4 hours, and he's just decided to pop his head out and say hello.
Decided to wake up for the day. Yeah.
Yep, pretty much. Lazy. Next screen is just the empty dashboard screen when they haven't got that YAML configuration that we're currently working on installed. Right now, it just shows the learn more link. I've realized none of that is entirely centered. That's annoying me now. But as Jan has pointed out, we should look at adding a button to the project's repository, and eventually look at creating the MR, etc. buttons and making it as simple as possible to for users to get started on this journey.
So in terms of adding the buttons to the project, what is the complexity of that? Like, is that a hard thing to do, or is that small? I don't really know the difficulty or scope.
So adding the button to the project, question mark, I don't know. Adding the button on this page, relatively simple, like that URL I've constructed. The way that the blob editor works is it takes the URL parameters from what you've set. So it would just be a URL on this page, and the rest would be handled by blob editor. So we wouldn't have to build anything, but users may find it confusing that we're just linking them to a blob editor for an empty file. So as a first iteration, maybe just documentation is the way to go for like the absolute first. And then as soon as we have a template, we can maybe like add a button here or something.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if adding the button to the project page itself is going to be complicated, we could just put a button on this page that says create your first dashboard and then goes into that flow.
If we can get a static template based off the schema definitions, then I would say that having a button on here and on the project, because I think the project is actually, again, it's a very simple, I think it's a Haml.
Yeah, it should be just a Haml URL
so
that takes the project ID.
I would be, if we can get a static template set up, then I'd be very keen on adding that button, because then that actually becomes useful. Whereas I feel like, as Jan said, if it's just a button to a blank page with nothing, no clear way of going after that, it'd be super confusing.
Yeah. We can do like we should maybe create an issue to quickly investigate how much effort it's going to be to create that template. I have a suspicion it's just going to be adding a file inside GitLab. As far as I know, that's how most of our templating works. But let me create an issue for us to confirm that.
And we should be able to create a pretty universal set of contents for that template. But that'll basically amount to what do our pre-built dashboards have in them. One of the things I'm thinking of is active users over a time frame, probably monthly. GitLab, we use MAU as our main metric for tracking progress. Many companies use DAO, or daily active users. So I think that as a very first hello world example would resonate with the audience for this type of capability. So we should be able to get a decent MAU or DAO template together for them to use here.
Okay, brilliant. So that sounds to me like the whole button concept, unless it's something we can do immediately, it sounds like literally the next step after this, if that makes sense. Is very shortly afterwards we'd add that if we find that we can add, if the template is slightly more complicated than we think, or the schemas take longer to finalize.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we don't have to have a button. It's not going to block our release because documentation only is acceptable, but it's going to be a huge usability improvement for our users to have the click a button, do the thing workflow instead. Okay,
let's have an action item out of that issue that Jan said he'd create to make that choice, that final decision, whether it goes in immediately or just afterwards.
Going back to the previous design on the instrumentation setup, what would you all think about putting a button on that dashboard page that says, get your keys or get your tokens or something similar there, and then just linking back to this page from the dashboard screen?
I think it's I think in linking back to this page or a similar page is probably what we want to do. How it's going to work is going to be a slightly difficult. The only reason is because the way this is going to be working is based off what's being configured. So essentially,
I have a thought. What we could do for the dashboard configuration is almost like some of the other dashboard apps that we've been using, like Jitsu and Cube have, where we can have like on the right-hand side, always have a button available, where it's basically like view your connection details or something that takes you to this page, or like set up your connection. So that no matter where you are on product analytics, you can always just access it quickly. It could even just be a modal that pops up.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, this page, I'm assuming it might end up, this page might end up being a view component that gets used in a modal as well as on this page, then, which is fine. Okay. Well, discussed that. So just the final design. This is taking what Tim has already done and refining it a bit to a sort of the MVC level. This is taking the tree style format, because I know eventually we're looking at having some kind of structure to these dashboards. So this is just that first iteration where everything is just a single layer tree structure with a title and a description, no iconography or labeling or anything like that at the minute. We can look at adding that as a future stuff, because the iconography is limited to just GitLab SVGs at the minute, which may or may not work from a user's point of view. I don't know. User research and whether it makes sense for them as well, right? So this is just a simplified version, and then we can easily, from a front end point of view, transition this into a tree-like structure once we get the schema definition defined on how that would work from a sort of the config file concept.
Sure. So this is just going to be showing the dashboards that have been defined in that directory, but any files in a subdirectory will not be displayed here. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, there's also some edge cases around like subdirectory that we still need to figure out, like Rob mentioned, that will go into a schema, like how deep do we allow? Because something that Rob and I discussed previously is like that it's potentially a vector for DDoSing GitLab if we, for example, just allow an infinitely deep directory to be created here with an infinite number of dashboard files that could create some chaos. So we probably want to think about it, you know, and put in some limitations on like just how users can define their dashboards.
Sure. How would you DDoS with file, assuming you don't have a symlink that creates an infinite loop? Would traversing a file structure?
Pure volume, yeah. So
Okay.
Making this a very expensive page for our Rails server to basically handle, and then just running a script to like refresh it a bunch of times would pretty much do it, because you'd be creating an issue for all the people on that Rails server.
And the GraphQL API, yeah, it has a timeout, but if you can do it in just a way to hit that just before that timeout, and then just hammer, you can, you know, it's unlikely, but it's something.
It's good we're thinking in that line though, because we should always have limits and constraints on things to prevent abuse like that. So good thinking. I would think a limit there might be 10. What would you all think of that? I mean, that seems like more than reasonable in terms of tree depth, where any legitimate user shouldn't hit it.
I think the limit we should define it not just from a technical perspective, but also from a UI point of view. I feel like if we go 10 deep, we might end up having potential layout issues.
Yeah, 10 deep on this tree, it's going to be very deep. I think if we're running into the customer need to have that many subdivisions in their dashboards, then something like tags or you know, having a filter by drop down here.
Yeah, different approach. Yeah, that makes sense. So something like 3 or 5 then instead is where we would want to put that limit.
Yeah, probably
I'd probably go for the lowest number possible.
Again, though, we will, as we get people on board and start doing those interviews and stuff, that will help define what that range is from their point of view. You always have people, users which are on the extreme end one way or another, but you want that median, don't you, really?
Sure. I guess from an abuse angle, so obviously going deep on directories would be one way to do it. What if a user just had, say, an infinite number of dashboards defined in a single directory? How might we think about putting limits or abuse protection in that case?
There's pagination limits on GraphQL, the API, GraphQL API, and they could only have one dashboard per directory. So you'd have to create a directory, then a YAML file within that directory to link to a dashboard. So we haven't got pagination defined on here, but it's something we can add as we get to that sort of offering to users, that next level.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to have something in place then to prevent the intentional abuse as well as just unintentional, oops, I broke something sort of workflows. Because if all I have to do is put it in its own directory, well, I can write a script that creates YAML files and runs a make. So we'll just want to make sure we have something there before we put this in front of actual customers.
You've also got a limit in terms of one other attempt is you could have fewer of the directories, but have those directories have a super long name to just bump up that data transfer, the amount of data that's being transferred as well.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Yeah. Well, so for this conversation, before we go too deep on abuse, we do have an issue to do a security review of all of this. We should have a similar issue, if we don't already, to discuss abuse protections. So let's say that for this screen, we'll need to put some abuse protections in place, and we can do that asynchronously. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Yep, noted as a action item. We're at time. We still have the discussion on how the MVC issues align with what our actual MVC vision and roadmap is. That's something that we can either do async, or if y'all feel like it, we can always make this a weekly meeting for now, since it seems like we have a lot to discuss.
I'd be fine with weekly. We can always cancel if we don't need it.
Okay, we'll update.
I feel like we've got a lot to discuss right now. I feel like it will go for a lull for a little while before it picks up again in the next stage too. So I guess we'll just play it by ear. But yeah,
I'm also open now if you all want to keep going. I don't have anything after this.
I have a view call, but it's not critical. I'm happy to go a few minutes over.
Yeah, the view 3 is being recorded. I'm not sure I'm going to have much to say, but I do want to know about it. So I'm happy to roll over and have to rewatch 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the previous recording.
Okay. Well, so what are our next steps then? I guess that is the question. And how does that align with our MVC and what we're doing for milestone planning? Is that the question?
Yeah, so I've created issues for each one of those screens already and linked them to that instrumentation screens issue. So under that, you'll see a bunch of related issues which are tied to each one of those designs. I haven't, and I need to, it's my highest priority, is to fill each of those out with more information, details, and also implementation plans, get them weighed. Now we've got a rough go ahead for the majority of those designs, just with some small tweaks. So that's what needs to happen to then, I guess, then allow to move this into. So I feel like we can move this into solution validation and then work on it from that. Unless anyone disagrees.
No, I was just about to ask that. Are we still planning on using that whole, issue process flow? Because you talked about creating implementation plan, because I think it would be useful to first start off and collaborate on, validating the solution or the problem within the solution and taking it through the whole step or all the steps.
Yeah, in general, I think we'll continue to use a similar process to what we did in the compliance group. We will be a little bit more lightweight on the validation phase, just because we don't have a dedicated UX or UX researcher resource. That's a mouthful. So we're going to have to get creative in how we do some of the validation. That can be done with either just a conversation with some potential test users internally, or some of it will need to be, we've agreed and are aligned on these are the problem statements. This is a solution to that problem statement. As far as we can see, it might not be perfect, but I want us to be cognizant of we keep iterating forward, not necessarily spending all our time validating that what we're doing is perfect before we move it all. Just because all of these things we're doing right now are two-way door decisions. V1 of anything, there's going to be a lot of follow-up work afterwards, no matter how much validation we do. So that's how I'm going to look at our planning process for all this.
Rob, as an action item on this, do you feel like you first need some time to work on the problem and proposal for all these issues, or would you like myself and maybe Sam to take a look at them now? Which order would you like?
I am more or less happy either way. I can't remember how far, but yeah, I have literally just chucked in proposals on each step. I have not filled out anything else. I haven't even put the final designs on each issue yet. So it's probably better for me to just get those filled out first, I guess. I mean, in terms of validation, this is, as Sam says, this is version 1. We have nothing yet, and we have nothing to validate against because we haven't even built the full product or a product that can be tested yet. I feel like we're going to have to do a lot of validation.
So the
V2 once we actually get into the internal preview and have something to share.
The goal that I have in mind is just that we make sure that the vision that Sam has outlined and like those slides are what we're covering with our issue, and also where we know where we're undercutting it or overcutting it in terms of, you know, is our MVC too thin or, you know, too heavy, etc. So it sounds like that's something that we can then validate next week, and then for in between, you and I can work on making sure that those issues are well defined.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm happy with that approach. I need to get those filled out, and any help in filling those out would be much appreciated, Jan.
Yeah, I will say I liked our discussion today. I think these designs do look really great. So I think you all are doing a great job putting your designer hats on.
It's all Rob.
So thank you for the flexibility on that.
I'm a generalist. I can't design a sig figure. Luckily enough, we have a whole component library that I can drag and drop onto a page, followed by extensive existing work I can rip off.
Don't give our secrets away, Rob.
A comment about how I sometimes work with UX folks. I don't expect you to do this unless you're just really keen to spend some time on it. Figma has prototyping capabilities in it as well. That's sometimes a way that my UX counterparts and I kind of explore what customer journeys might look like for a given design as a way to discover, oh, I get stuck on this screen, or I want to get to do that sort of workflow. I don't expect you all to put those together, but if you're keen on becoming a Figma expert, that is something that is pretty useful in my experience.
Yeah, I did take a look at that and I couldn't figure out how to make it work, so I just ran away.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right. In that case, does anyone have any other agenda items? I think we've covered them all. And we have a bunch of action items. So unless there's any last minute item to add, I think we can call it a call.
The only thing I'd like to ask is, do we or should we have design issues in the various epics to make sure that we've got somewhere to do the next step? Because right now we've got this one just for the internal handbook, internal preview stuff, but then we've got cluster setup, manual cluster setups, automatic picking regions, and various.
What I would recommend we do there is we create a new epic for post MVC tasking. And then we create, if we need a child epic or a child issue under there to capture, hey, this is the topic, and do the design work, the implementation and planning in there, just so we don't lose them.
Okay. Only reason I ask is because once we've got this done, we're going to have 6 odd front end issues to start working on, which is great and exactly what we need. But then we've got to keep that pipeline going. So we've got to go back to UX and start looking at what we're going to do next, and keep that going forward, which I am not an expert in.
We're doing a great job, so don't sell yourself short, Rob.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks for sending this up, you all. Anything else we want to go through before we break?
No, I'm good. Yeah, please just check the meeting notes to make sure that I didn't misrepresent anything that you said. But yeah, thanks so much also, Sam, for your time. This was like super helpful, just to bounce some ideas and, you know, make sure that we're aligned. Especially feel like, yeah, UX and product needs to work quite closely in order to, sorry, I'm getting a call at the moment.
Sure. And feel free to ping me on Slack. Always happy to hop on a quick call synchronously outside of our scheduled meeting time too. So
yeah, thank you for that. I've been trying to make it async as much as possible, but design async is hard.
It's hard. And yeah, I'm expecting some sync calls and questions. So no issue if we want to do some not async work.
I appreciate that. Me and Jan already noticed a few things that we'd like to polish on the design, GitLab design feature to actually make it better.
Yeah, there's definitely some things there that could be improved. So
okay, I think we can call it then.
Sounds good.
I will get on the MVC stuff and getting those issue descriptions ready for next week. Other than that, I hope you have a good rest of your week, Sam and Jan.
Yeah, thanks, you too. Bye, folks. We'll talk soon.
Bye all.